my alma mater, Rutgers University, has decided that they too would like to get in on the censorship game in a very dangerous way. So here we go.
As Melissa Rose Cooper reports, the actions are intensifying a fierce debate around free speech versus hate speech on college campuses.
You criticize the human rights elements of what's going on in Palestine right now. That should not be categorized as anti-Semitic.
Yet Dina Saeed Ahmed, communications director for the New Jersey chapter of the Council of Islamic Relations, says that's exactly what's happening following Rutgers New Brunswick's decision to suspend the organization's Students for Justice in Palestine. In a letter dated December 11th, the Office of Student Conduct indicates the suspension is in response to multiple complaints of gatherings and events that have caused people on campus to feel unsafe. Members are accused of disrupting classes, a program, meals, and student studying. There are also allegations of vandalism occurring at the Rutgers Business School.
It doesn't seem justifiable that they would suspend a student group for civil disobedience work when civil disobedience is part and parcel of the college experience. So it's a little shocking, it's worrying, and it feels very macabre.
Okay, well, we're not going to wait for the scrambling to continue, so you guys get the idea. And Jen just brought this up.
Well, I'm very curious.
Yes, so I'm sure that we'll get a pretty good insight as to what's happening with Hillel on Rutgers.
Because I would think that Hillel would make a lot of people feel very uncomfortable and unsafe. So yes, maybe Hillel should not be able to exist on campus.
So we are very pleased to welcome our esteemed guest. Sahar Aziz is a distinguished professor of law at Rutgers University, alma mater.
You went to Rutgers?
Yes, I did. Executive director of the Center for Security, Race and Rights, and author of the groundbreaking book, The Racial Muslim, When Racism Quashes Religious Freedom. And we all know that is becoming more and more obvious by the day.
Right.
Sahar Aziz, welcome to Generational Change. You are
Wait, you're muted.
Muted. There you go.
No, you're muted. Hold on. Something is awry. Wait, why is she's muted?
Not anymore. Let's try it again.
Are you there? Something is wrong.
So there is a technical issue.
We're having
hang for a
technical difficulties.
Or can you hear me?
Yeah, obviously.
Okay. Try at the bottom of your screen. There's a settings button. And in there's a little audio setting where you can select your mic. Maybe there's sometimes it gets selected to like your webcam or something.
Come on.
She's got to find settings.
Yeah. Oh.
Wait, something happened.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So, obviously this is something that we've been seeing going on a lot of campuses. This is obviously not the first time in history where the idea is to squash the narrative because you don't have any sort of alternative, right? So the idea is just to keep it quiet. But I'd love to hear your perspective, like what's going on there on campus, what actually happened that led to people feeling unsafe as to that they had to ask Students for Justice for Palestine? Is it SJP?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, that they had to not be on campus. Like what in the world is going on?
Well, I think first we've got to look at this very troubling and problematic decision by Rutgers University within the broader context of what's happening in the United States. And the theme is clear, the trend is clear, which is that students, particularly when they're Muslim, Arab, or Palestinian, when they are actively engaged in college activism through teach-ins, through sit-ins, through protests, through non-violent means of political activism, which is what many of us believe universities, that's part of their role as they educate students and cause them to think deeply and critically and feel connected and socially aware of some of the most complex issues facing our country and our world at this moment in time. So it's a very American tradition that we're proud of, that universities are places for robust activity, political activity, and discussion and thought. So what you've seen with Harvard, with MIT, with the University of Pennsylvania, with Berkeley, with many other universities, is that rather than encouraging their students to engage in this very American tradition of college activism, which historically has led to significant social change for the common good, they have quashed it, right? They have vilified it. In some cases, they've attempted to criminalize it. And that is a result in large part from external actors. Sometimes they're very wealthy donors. Sometimes they're legal organizations who are open about their unflinching, unconditional support for the state of Israel's practices and policies, and their ideological zealotry in support of right-wing Zionism, and also other external groups that are not necessary, they're not part of the university, and they're pressuring these universities to police their students, to surveil their students, to control their students, as if the students are children, as if they are not adults. Right. And so what you see at Rutgers is just the extension of that. And so the Students for Justice in Palestine at Rutgers are the latest casualty of this nationwide quashing of college activism when it is in defense of Palestinian human rights. Because what you're not seeing is when there were numerous pro-Israeli protests and sit-ins and college activism, especially in the first week or two after October 7th, universities had no problem with that. There was no concern about whether those protests made Arab students or Palestinian students or Muslim students or other, their allies feel uncomfortable, feel unsafe, feel unwelcome. Nobody cares about those students, even though they pay tuition, even though they're, in theory, on paper, equal citizens, they have equal status as students. But what you're seeing is only the Muslim, Arab, Palestinian students and student organizations are being shut down. And the only exception is where you see Jewish Voice for Peace at Columbia be shut down. And that's because they were allied with Students for Justice in Palestine.
Speaking with Professor Sahar Aziz, I graduated in 06, and one of the major changes that happened over the course of the past decade plus is Rutgers, and forgive me for the sports analogy, Jen.
Oh, for God's sake.
Rutgers went from the Big East into the Big Ten. And one of the things that ends up happening—
That'll keep me up at night.
But can I please have some relevant topic here?
I'm sorry.
So when you welcome in the major college funding machine, you probably also are welcoming in some very powerful billionaires, and in many cases, very powerful Jewish billionaires. And I would imagine—
Or just Zionists.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Bill Ackman doesn't have his hands in every single major university on the East Coast, but I would imagine he, among others, probably has a hand in Rutgers. And by doing so, when that type of money and influence is at the table, I'm willing to bet that in part has probably influenced some of this change. Would you say that that's fair to say?
Well, what we're seeing nationwide, I can't speak to Rutgers in particular because we don't know which donors. Well, there is one actually couple that has gone public and said, we will no longer be writing checks to Rutgers. I believe they gave around $130,000 a year, a little more than that, and they were alumni. But what we're seeing is a structural problem, and this specific, what we'll call case study, right, of external groups that profess their commitment to right-wing political Zionism, they are now trying to control universities as if they're think tanks, as if a university is a political action committee, as if a university is a political party, as opposed to a space where students and faculty and staff are supposed to engage in robust debate, discussion, research, debate. They don't have to agree. And when they disagree on the merits, and they attempt various strategies to persuade each other. Some of it is within a classroom. Sometimes it's outside the classroom on college campus. So what you're seeing now is just a worst case scenario of the structural problem of universities not being independent. And they're not independent for economic reasons. And these presidents, I think, are breaching their fiduciary duty to, first and foremost, the students of the university. Right? Their duty is not to the donors. Their duty is not to the alumni. Their duty is not to the sports fans. It is to ensure that the students are receiving a high quality education. And that's not just in the classroom, it's also outside the classroom. So when you have student groups who have gone through the process to be registered, to essentially be trained, and they're now engaging in nonviolent civic engagement, civil disobedience that's nonviolent, suddenly they get shut down with no warning, with no pre-suspension hearing, with no details as to what exactly they did that supposedly violated some policy, with no notice of whether that policy is actually being equally enforced, as opposed to being enforced based on the group's political ideology or political preferences or race or ethnicity or religious identity. So there's a lot of questions about the closure of the suspension of the SJP chapter that happened categorically. It was very fast. The students got no notice, and they suddenly found themselves suspended and told, in 2 days you get a hearing, which of course you can't even prepare for the hearing within 2 days, especially if you look at the letter, and it's available online because it got leaked to the media. And when it got leaked to the media, it included personally identified information of a student who happens to be Muslim, which of course puts that student's safety at risk. Yeah. And it violates that student's privacy, which is a violation of multiple laws and policies. So even the university can't follow its own policies. So everything, all the circumstances surrounding this suspension, I think makes Rutgers look very bad, especially for purposes of academic freedom and free speech.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is making a lot of these universities look bad. And I want to just ask you your thoughts on this, because this is something that really bothered me when I was watching the hearing with, I forget her name, from Penn, and then the woman from the president from Harvard. And I don't need to know other names, whatever. Okay. So, well, no, the congresswoman, oh, her I know. Yeah. No, I'm talking about the president. But what really bothers me is that not one of these women, and I shouldn't say that they're women, people, presidents, stood up and actually said the correct thing, which is that no students were calling for the genocide of Jews. Now, the fact that our congresswoman is Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And so the fact that these congresspeople are saying to them, is it within your school policy to allow for the call of genocide? Well, why is nobody challenging that? Because that is not what happened. I am sick and tired of the from the river to the sea being automatically transcribed into the calling of a genocide. And I've called out my congresswoman and said, you need help, Debbie, get some help. Okay. You've got serious genocidal projections, but it's like, why did none of these presidents stand up and say something about that? Nobody was calling for genocide.
Well, to her credit, the president of, I believe it was MIT, she did say, I have not heard anyone on campus say that they are supporting a genocide of Jews.
They don't call them out for giving that implication that they are flat out giving that based on a phrase that they know damn well can be interpreted multiple ways.
Well, you know, and I've said this before, is if you don't look at the context of student speech, because first we should always approach student speech on college campuses with an inference that it's protected and an inference that it is not intended to produce violence. Unless there are circumstances that show that this is an unusual kind of exception to speech, which, for example, you cannot use speech that would cause imminent danger, right? Imminent violence, which that is not, there was no evidence of that in any of the protests that were at issue. But effectively what they're doing is they're taking a phrase and they are seeking to use a definition that was the common interpretation 50 years ago. 50 years ago. So yes, if you're talking about the early 1980s and the 1970s and early 1990s only when it came to certain militia groups, not all Palestinians. Right. When they said from the river to the sea 50 years ago, that's what they meant. They meant, we don't recognize a Jewish state. We want a Palestinian state, and Jews can live in a Palestinian state and be citizens, or they can leave, but we don't recognize a two-state solution. It's now been 50 years later. That term has become completely redefined by a new generation of diasporic communities that are Jewish, that are Muslim, that are Christian, that are of Black, Arab, every single ethnicity you can think of, that have become knowledgeable and understand now the facts on the ground in Palestine, in Gaza, in the West Bank, and even with Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, and have realized that, the only way that we're going to actually find a sustainable solution for Jewish security and Palestinian freedom and dignity and equality is to think about the problem from the river to the sea. So the river to the sea could be a two-state solution. It could be a one-state secular, non-ethno-nationalist solution. It could be a one-state solution where you have a federalist system and there's two autonomous regions, one that identifies as Jewish majority, one that identifies as Arab majority. But the point is, you cannot fix this problem, right? This complex political problem without thinking about it from the river to the sea. And that definition has completely changed over this last 50 years. And what no one seems to be asking, and this is what I thought was the true irony, and it was so tragic, is why all these women are being grilled and essentially, subjected to this witch hunt by congressional leaders, is at that very moment in time, you have over 20,000 Palestinian civilians that had been slaughtered by Israel.
But let's not worry about them. Let's worry about people's feelings.
But the bottom line is, and we've talked about this a lot. I've talked about this a lot. I started a little over a year ago a series called Deconstructing Zionism on this show. And so this is something we've been talking about for a long time. And as someone who was raised Zionist and very programmed for very many years, and I feel like I'm sharing the secrets of what that was. Like, it's almost cult-like in certain mentality, but we were it was ingrained in us that we were superior and better than. Okay. And not necessarily overtly. It wasn't something where necessarily people said you're better than them. It wasn't like that, but it is not a doubt in my mind that people like my congresswoman and people that are pushing this narrative absolutely think of Palestinians as lesser. Not a doubt in my mind. And so when we talk about, because I would like these people to answer how they would feel if the Hamas fighters went and hid in a hospital in Tel Aviv, if their strategy would be the same. And I know for a fact it would not be. So that to me is just flat. I mean, it's clear. What's the rate now? How many Palestinian bodies for Israel? Like when they do a swap, it's like
100 to 1.
It's like 100 to 1. So it's like for people to not own that, they absolutely think of them as lesser.
But remember, they have to justify this in any way possible. It's like a person who will not be named that suggested that you need to take a look at this Hamas website. And all I'm thinking is, let me make this as clear to you as I possibly can. Let's make this as clear as it can possibly be made. Israel is an occupied territory. And until that changes, you are not ending Hamas. What you're actually doing, just based on your strategy alone, is you are creating infinitely more Hamases or terror cells that are going to wreak havoc all over the Middle East and potentially in this country.
Well, that's
next. If you think that it's not going to end any other way, it's like you can't bomb something into oblivion when you are in the wrong from jump. And it's like people who say that there was a ceasefire before October 7th. That
was not a ceasefire.
So
it was a blockade.
Yeah.
It's a siege, but first of all, and I keep saying this, words matter. This isn't a war. And I find the use of that word
I know, right?
So ridiculous. Well, all of it, okay? And just watching the angling, it's interesting how Israelis get killed, but Palestinians die.
Oh, no, listen, if you want Hezbollah and Turkey involved, then you can have a war, and then you'll really see how
it's all the language, it's all the framing of it, it's all of it. And it's once you see it everywhere. This is why I can't watch regular news. I can't watch that swell. Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.